Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most trim work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And before we get into the chapters this week, quick note, fan art contest. The fan art contest is still running. The theme is the power of the holidays, and you have until the 4th of January to get your submissions in.
Yep. So, get drawing.
Yep, get drawing, power of the holidays, do your worm or ward or pact or pale only themed fan art, and yeah, we'll be talking more about this when it approaches the submission close date.
Yeah.
Now let's get into cutting class 6.8. We're in Lucy's perspective again, and she's continuing the ritual, recoiling as the earring gets her to demonstrate how she would have acted in past situations if she had its power. We start with a scene where some classmates are being real jerks. And the first line of this chapter is, "Heads up, the bitch marches," in this kind of italics, which signifies that it's being, magically overheard. And what a strong way to get us into the chapter and immediately set up going to be doing more eavesdropping, and people are going to be shit talking Lucy. We're right back in her kind of crusader headspace here.
Yeah, you're right, because that italics thing had been set up so strongly last
Yes.
chapter that you sort of immediately understand where
You
we're going
immediately
with this.
grok what we're being, what at least this first part of this chapter is going to be about.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I really like the writing here because something that gets established very quickly is that like we're seeing two scenes that are sort of happening concurrently. So like there's obviously the original version of the scene, and then we've got like what Lucy would do now with the earring. Um, and I was just really impressed by how this was written because I was basically never confused as to what was happening, despite two similar-ish scenes happening in overlap.
Mm,
I just thought that was really impressive writing. That it's like it opens with this sort of repetition of Lucy who did hear, and then explains something that's like Lucy who didn't hear, and you're like, what? And then it's like then Wildbow just sort of actually does explain it and say, oh yeah, there's two Lucys, and then from there it's just juggled really well so that you get it.
yeah, it's a strange little premise, but I actually think the fact that it's at times like a bit disorienting is something that we've seen Wildbow do before, where he lets it be a bit disorienting so that you can feel more akin to the headspace that the characters are in. And I'm assuming this is disorienting for Lucy as well. So yeah, it kind of plays into it more than it stumps us, I think, which is good.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then like obviously, in this scene, for the vast majority of it, it barely plays out any differently because Lucy, like,
Yep.
it's kind of proving the earrings point about how Lucy always kind of knew. Because
Yeah, she already knew all this stuff. Like all this information was
yeah,
already accessible to her.
yeah, exactly. So like, the majority of this barely changes, and it's only really at the end where she sort of comforts Verona more and offers to help Verona out more, and that's when
Mm,
Verona kind of leaves, and there's this bit where the kids are like trying to pull Verona away from Lucy, and that's sort of where the earring gets to come in and be like, oh, is this really what you want?
yeah.
And Lucy gets to say yes, and maybe we'll talk about that more at the end.
Mm. Yeah, I even like even the difference between these two scenes. It doesn't even necessarily feel to me like it's because Lucy has the earring. I mean, I guess it is in
Mm,
part, but it's almost also or more so just the fact that if you get to do moments of your life over again, you with later contextual knowledge, you might just do things slightly differently, right?
Yeah, or yeah, I agree. It's almost more of a statement of where Lucy is now. Like I think
Yeah,
she is a stronger. And this is what she wanted the earring to do, was to enhance herself, and this is
yeah,
almost the earring sort of saying, "Yeah, I'm like, yeah, like the only difference here is she just sort of doesn't cede the ground and stands up to them, and
mm,
that's more to do with her than the earring specifically because it's just
mm,
enhancing her."
yeah, definitely, I agree. Um,
I also like I love we still get to do a bit of characterization of Verona here as well because we get a snapshot of Verona pre her parents' divorce,
mm,
and you can see how she's like happier, but
hmm.
also like clearly things weren't perfect at her home beforehand anyway because she's very stressed about what she's done to these genes and how her parents will react,
Yep. Yeah, it was always a bit of a tense family home situation, seems to be I guess, the message.
which makes sense.
Yep.
Like, you can already sort of see inklings of where her parents are now. It just seems like it wasn't that bad yet, or like, the dam hadn't broken.
Mm,
But it's like, her mum's already working too much to really help her with stuff. Her dad is like just wearing the same clothes all the time. It's like it's one of those 2020 hindsight things where it's like, oh no, the warning signs are all there.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It was always going to be a bit of a worrying situation at home, I guess.
Yeah. And so the last thing I wanted to say on this little section was just how cinematic it is. Like, there's the bit where, so like after this scene where she sort of comforts Verona and declares to the earring that she does want to hear this stuff, even if it's harder. Um, the earring sort of is like, okay, so let's decide some more stuff about me, and then let's go of Lucy, and like Lucy drops, and there's no ground beneath her feet, and it's very cinematic, like dreamscape esque. I just really loved it.
Mm, yeah, yeah, you're right. It's very visual, which is nice again to help tether us in this kind of abstract ritual.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, Lucy gets dropped into some kind of horror movie scene set in an office building where she basically has to avoid these murderous office workers.
Yeah, I mean, this is very fun. I feel like of all the scenarios we see, this is kind of the most just the earring being like struggle.
Yeah, here's just a challenge. How do you deal with it?
um, yeah, it's interesting too. Like, I could see how this scene, which at first just seemed like, oh, it's a random horror movie scene. But it like when I sort of thought about it, like I don't know if Lucy's really talked much about what she sees her like life being when she's grown up. Like, she's mentioned she wants to get married and all that, but like what job she sees herself having or that sort of thing.
Mm,
Um, and I definitely, at least in my head, view like an office building, like the one she ends up in, as this kind of ultimate embodiment of like the man and the system. Uh, so
yeah,
like this being set in like a office where the other people in the office are like, targeting Lucy. I can sort of see where that's coming from.
yeah, maybe. Thinking about it though, I don't think these people are meant to represent office workers because we do get these like dead office workers as well. I don't know. Maybe you're right though. Maybe it is a bit of like the earring playing into the fears. It doesn't seem
Yeah.
super strong enough to draw any concrete conclusions from though.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, also we know Lucy just like watches horror movies, so the earring probably has lots of crazy stuff to pull from. She's also basically lived a few horror movies at this point.
Mm, yeah, true. The thing I like about this scene is we mentioned the bodies before, and it starts out feeling like it's kind of, because we know this is fictional. I mean, it doesn't feel like there's any super strong stakes in this scene. But then Lucy finds these 7 dead bodies piled up, and I'm just kind of like, oh, this is going to be horrifying if she gets caught. So even though it's still, I guess, imaginary, it really ratchets it up in a nice way.
Yeah, and I mean, in this world, you can never be sure, right? Like, there's always a chance that she could just end up grievously injured in this ritual, and that
Mm.
will like hurt her for the rest of her life.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah.
I, I, and like, I'm curious. Did you get like paths sort of vibes from all these little vignettes? Like, it's
Mm.
different, but like, I could sort of see these as being like similar to the paths in kind of what they are cosmologically in the world of Pale.
Mm. Yeah, I guess it's just a kind of a different space to be in where you have to deal with challenges. I mean, it's not strictly the same as Pars, but there is definitely these kind of overlap in stuff like this.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I guess there's also kind of comparisons you could make to the Alcazar stuff. Like, it's there's similarities to maybe Alcazaring into yourself. Maybe. I
Mm.
mean, just all these things are so fun. Maybe they all kind of relate just because they're really awesome ways to turn
Yeah, because they're all
concepts
just
into spaces.
they're all just fun stuff. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Um, so this little vignette ends a with Lucy kind of hiding in the ceiling. She ends up stabbing and killing one of these, hunters. And apparently that's enough of a kind of response for the earring to get whatever answer it wants out of this scene, and it goes to the next scene. But I'm kind of thinking like with the latest vignettes, we get clearer things that Lucy is deciding on, whereas this one doesn't necessarily have that. I'm kind of curious what you think the earring might be getting out of this scene in particular.
I took this one to directly relate to one of the things it talks about is getting sharper edges. And obviously, in this vignette, she uses it to stab the guy first before switching to one of the knives she pulls out of his head.
Mm,
So I thought this was probably the moment where it decided it should have those slightly sharper edges in order to be better for stabbing. Whereas
interesting.
if Lucy had never reached for it and gotten the kill or gotten killed, like that might
Mm,
have, given it the rounder edges or something.
mm. I guess something that we see later on again is Lucy uses it as a weapon again to stab Paul, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So you're right. Maybe it's taking shape as something that Lucy can use as a weapon in a last ditch kind of scenario. I like that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Lucy stabs a guy in the neck with, or stabs him with the earring, and then grabs his knife, right, and stabs him in the neck,
Yeah.
um, and then is transported into the future into her own hypothetical wedding.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a much more fun vignette. Uh, and I love all there's like all these little details because this is basically like a hypothetical the earring has constructed from like what Lucy thinks the future could be like.
Mm,
And it's like I love, yeah, all the like Avery is kind of run off and she's happy and she's affiliated with Glamour and the that stuff there. I was like, okay, yeah, this does make sense. And then like Alyssa is there and she's still only labeled as Booker's girlfriend, which I just thought was funny because Lucy's subconscious won't let her marry Booker yet.
mm, mm. Yeah, I like that. I thought that was funny when you pulled it out. Just Lucy has not given the internal seal of approval to Alyssa.
Yeah, because like maybe this is unfair because like at this point they would have been dating for like over 10 years, I
Yeah,
assume.
definitely. I mean, if she's
Um,
still around, they're probably pretty serious.
Yeah, and marriage isn't the end game for all couples. Like, I know couples who have been dating for like 20 years and they just don't want to get married for whatever reason. But that's not the vibe I took out of this
Mm,
specifically. Like that could be the case, but I more read it as just like in Lucy's hypothetical, like happily ever after wedding. Alyssa isn't yet married to Booker because she hasn't passed that hurdle yet.
mm, yeah, true. So yeah, it's a fun scene. I mean, this one really. I mean, the last one we get a bit of a picture of what's going on, but this one we really get a stronger picture, specifically what the earring is doing, which is pushing Lucy and forcing her to make difficult decisions about who she actually wants to be, right? And then
Yeah.
obviously as a result, it's kind of playing off of her and indicating kind of where those decisions might lead.
Yeah, I think this is really fun because it's sort of the last vignette, like, and you talked about this, like how it just sort of ends when she stabs the guy, and you're like, okay, so what does this mean? And that's kind of the one that really starts to get it into your head that these aren't about winning or losing; these are about Lucy making statements. Um, and so in this one, like obviously we get her doing a lot of that. But my favorite one is like she decides that actually she's not going to let Verona go, like the earring kind of challenges her by presenting this idea that Verona is not yet at the wedding.
Mm,
Um, and I was like freaking out. I was like, "Oh no, what does Lucy think is going to happen?" But yeah, Lucy just it's kind of a challenge, and Lucy gets to say, "No, fuck off! Like I'm going to keep Verona, that someone who helped build you, like in my life."
yeah, yeah, it's great stuff. Um, Yeah, so there's a few challenges like this, right? The Verona one, which she resolves by ceding the idea that no, Verona at least helped make the dress, so she's definitely a part of this, a part of my life, even if maybe weddings aren't her speed. Sure.
Well, I think by the end, Verona is there because Lucy sort of says something like, "Is she here yet?"
Oh yes,
or
true.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of has this dream logic, right, where things can happen of their own accord, but you can like think things into existence as well, which is a fun vibe.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and I love how that extends to Lucy a little bit as well. Like, there's part of her that just she's got that dream logic thing happening where you know how you just kind of accept things that are happening in dreams. Like, oh yeah, this
mm,
is my life. I'm like a 20-year-old who's getting married.
yeah,
And it's it's like then you sort of wake up and you're like, no, I'm not. What was I thinking? It's like Lucy is kind of aware that she's in the ritual, but also like she seems to get suckered in a little bit so that she doesn't challenge it so much.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, you're right. I guess it is that vibe where there's probably an aspect to it that Lucy is thinking about where if she challenges every single thing, that also presumably has impacts, right? Like sometimes you have to not challenge something, otherwise you're just the person who challenges every little piece, you know? I
Well,
suspect there's mm,
that kind of puts her against the ritual and against the earring, which wouldn't
yes,
be a good thing to
exactly.
do.
Which is probably not what you want.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so she has decided that her partner knows about the practice. She's decided that she will seemingly always wear her implement, her earring, when she's not using it to stab somebody. Um, yeah, good decisions by Lucy, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I love when her husband comes in and Avery kind of insists they can't look at each other because traditions are important.
Hmm.
Um, because I just love this as a way to keep the husband like identity free because it's just sort of like, you can't look at him, so like let's keep his identity out of it. He's a construct for
Yes,
this scenario.
yes.
He's not an actual person, and uh, this is such a clever way by Wildbow to let us have a scene with him, but like have an excuse for Lucy not to look at him.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. A way for Lucy to not have to think about it as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it just in and out of the story. It's a great way to explain away not giving him a face.
Mm. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so back to what you sort of said, like Lucy makes these three decisions, and I feel like two of these just feel kind of objectively good to me, which is telling your partner about the practice and like actually being open with them,
yep,
and two, like deciding that Verona is going to stay in her life.
yep.
I'm I'm less decided on always wearing the implement.
Mm.
I like the sort of imagery of like no rest for the virtuous that she kind of has going. Like she will always be fighting. She's not going to slack
Yeah,
off.
and that explicitly comes up later.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll talk about this then too. But like, I also just worry for her like own stress levels and mental health. With that kind of attitude.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess we can touch on this later when the ring explicitly calls it up as something that she does.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do that.
Um, yeah, so I guess the ring then pushes this drawback of her deciding to keep the practice a permanent fixture of her life and talks about how uh, this will lead Lucy to be more embroiled in the practice in her relationships, I guess, and talk about how, the I guess the twist in air quotes that the ring puts forward is that Lucy is getting married, at least initially for political reasons, although she and her fiance seem to have some genuine connection.
Yeah, I felt like this was part of the test. Like the earring, after she commits to wearing it, then the earring's like, wants to continue pushing.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, yeah, okay, well, this is a political marriage. And Lucy kind of reinforces she has feelings for him as well. And so that's sort of her saying, I'm not going to do it for just that, at least.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
she's going to marry for love.
Yeah.
Yeah, she refuses to cede ground, which again is sort of her thing that was
Yep,
established
classic
with
Lucy.
Fiona. Yeah, so yeah, I saw this as a challenge. It'd be interesting to think about how that would work in real life, like how Lucy would respond to the idea that that's something she should consider.
Mm, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I don't think we're ever going to see Lucy actually get married in the story, right?
No.
But I think it's interesting to think about this and have Lucy think about this being the way that her life might be leading on its current trajectory.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is like a character study in its like rawest form because in text it's literally the character doing a journey of self-discovery
Yeah,
and deciding what parts of themselves they want to enhance.
yeah. Um, so yeah, that vignette ends, and we get into the next vignette, which is a very intense scene for Lucy to deal with. The night when Paul left.
Like,
Um,
"Urgh,
yeah,
this scene.
it's so frustrating to listen to this conversation, right? Because Paul is just 100% being the worst. He's just completely not listening to what Jazz is saying, and she's being so good, like giving him so much
She's
leeway,
so patient.
extending so much exactly right, extending so much patience towards him, and he's just being such a huge asshole and just like completely ignoring her. So yeah, two thumbs up, Paul. You're a piece of shit.
This reminds me of something that came up in like We've Got Ward a bit, which is like this stuff that is kind of relatable or benignly evil kind of gets to you more than like, evil giant supernatural monsters like we have in this story.
Yeah, the human stuff gets to you more, right?
Yeah, yeah, like, and Verona's dad is another, like, great example of this, like, people hate Verona's dad a lot more than they do, like, the fucking evil monsters that have been introduced, and it's because Verona's dad gets you on a very human level.
Yes. Makes you
Um,
very mad. And it's not like a mad where it's, oh, it's this evil villain and we're going to go take them down. It's a mad where the whatever possible clean solution there might be, it's never going to be as clean as just being able to take this person down, you know? Like there's
yeah,
no
exactly.
solution that will completely holistically solve this problem.
Like, yeah, because what frustrates you about Paul in this scene is, like, I can totally picture someone doing this in a
Mhm.
conversation. In fact, like, if I'm being perfectly honest, like, when I was younger, I was probably this person in, like, less serious conversations, but, like,
Yeah.
I think it's a very easy mindset for you to fall into, and that's sort of the whole point Lucy's making this chapter, and we'll get there, but, like, yeah, God, it's just so frustrating that he just won't move out of his own goddamn headspace, and, like, pretty much everything Jazz is saying is like, "Please, if you could just see it from my point of view," and then he's always like, "No, give me a simple solution to this," and she's like,
I
"I
know,
can't
right? Like
because."
she says, "Hey, there's no easy solution to this because of this," and he's like, "I'm not going to listen to you until you give me a simple solution." And
Yeah.
that's just his defense the entire time. I mean, not even using the word defense is wrong. It's because not a
Yeah.
defense. He's not defending himself. He's just ignoring what she's saying.
But Lucy makes the point, like, later in her own internal monologue that he wanted to lose this argument, and you can kind of see that because,
Yeah,
like, there's one point where he's like he basically says to Jazz, "So, you know, are you calling me a racist? Call me a racist." And she's like, "If you're not gonna listen to me, that's kind of what you're doing." And then he's sort of like, "How dare you call me a racist?" And I was
I
like,
know,
"Fuck off."
Jesus. Oh my god. Yeah, he's a nightmare.
Um, yeah. Yeah, very good writing here because I think this just got under everyone's skin that I've seen. Like, whenever I see a live read of this chapter, people are just losing their minds at Paul.
Yep. Um, so yeah, I guess the decisions that Lucy has to make in this scene, the things that she confronts are one, whether she actually continues to listen to the scene or not, whether she goes back to bed. Two, whether she confronts Paul or not, and three, how she kind of reacts to her mother. Right?
Mm,
Lucy doesn't go back to bed, or the earring offers her the choice to just hide with Booker, and she turns it down. She confronts Paul, and again, using her earring, kind of minorly injures him. Good, deserves it. But then she kind of interacts with her mother, and her mother, kind of puts on her brave face for Lucy. And Lucy thinks about a response, but doesn't say it. She thinks, oh, it's not your fault, mum. Like, he wanted to lose that conversation, etc., of what we've discussed. But she doesn't actually say that to her mother, right? And I'm
mm.
interested to get your read on that vibe. Yeah, like, do you think she should have? Do you think she could have?
I don't know. This might be one of those scenarios where just not saying anything is the right because it's so raw. I don't know.
Mm,
I mean, this is that scene. I mean, like, this was one of the first things we ever got introduced to Lucy with, right? Is it was like in her very first chapter, she compared the look on John's face to this moment with her mum.
yes, yes.
Um, so like this is sort of a very formative scene for her, and maybe there's a thing where it's like she just can't imagine it going any differently because it's so core to her.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I don't know.
mm. Yeah, you're right. Maybe she can't yet break out of the mold of like the parent child relationship defining their relationship, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I don't know. Like, I don't know what she could say there that would actually help. Like, I don't think her mum was at a point right there that saying anything. Like, it's just you've just got to be there at that point.
Mm,
I don't know. I
yeah.
mean, the bit where she uses her earring as a weapon, against Paul, because he kind of like puts his hand on her face, and so she just squeezes his hand to sort of stab him with the earring, which is like an interesting, it's very different to pulling it off and using it as an offensive weapon. It's almost more of a like a defense or like a thorn sort of thing. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's
Mm,
just it's very interesting and different imagery.
mm. Yeah, you're right. Because it's not like she's not even really trying to achieve anything by attacking him. She's just venting a bit of frustration, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
Well, it's
it's
almost like it's almost like just literally spreading some of her pain. I'm trying to think of a better way of phrasing that.
yeah,
It's like he sort of she's kind of cutting through his bullshit of like pretending that he's sorry or whatever, and just sort of using it as a bit of an extension of herself to inflict or reciprocate some of the pain he's inflicting on her.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, uh, yeah. I wonder what, because we discussed seeing her earring used kind of as a weapon or as a very personal kind of way to jab somebody with herself, right?
Yeah.
Um, I wonder what impact that will have on it. Uh, We'll have to see, I guess. We'll see. I want to see when she does this for the first time, in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Um, Also, what do you think of like, I thought it was interesting that she's kind of content to just give Booker a pass
like
because
let
she's
him
sort of
stay
like,
in bed.
yeah, she's like, "Are you gonna come with me?" And he's like, "No, I've got a test tomorrow."
Mm.
Um, and I would have thought Earring Lucy would have kind of been like, "No, you should come."
Yeah. Interesting. You're right. I didn't clock that, but you're right. I think I would say it's consistent with Lucy's character that she doesn't necessarily force other people to fight her battles for her, right?
Hmm.
So maybe that's, I don't know.
Well, yeah,
Maybe
but
that's
usually
kind of what
she
it's saying.
yeah, I mean, but she usually judges the people who aren't fighting the good fight. Like she expects, well, I feel like she usually expects other good people to step up. And she thinks so highly of Booker. I thought it was interesting that she didn't note that he didn't hear. I don't
Mm,
know. Maybe I'm reading too much into this moment. This is just meant to be the earring giving her an out.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. um, so yeah, Lucy continues to deal with more scenes, and the earring questions a pattern that has been established. Lucy keeps fighting the good fight, even as it continues to wear her down, and the earring asks why.
Hmm. And I'm not going to read the whole quote that's sitting in the notes in front of you, Ruben, because
Hmm.
it's very long.
It's a long one.
Um,
Yep.
But I love this moment where it's almost like feeding off of the Paul stuff that just happened. Uh, Lucy sort of explains why she wants the earring and why she wants to hear this stuff, and it's because someone can tell you all the answers, and it doesn't matter if you're not listening. Like how you figure stuff out isn't just through yourself, but like it's hearing other people say the good and the bad, and that's why she needs to keep listening because that's how she helps people. That's how
Mm,
she hurts them, but, like, it's like that's how you get better, and I love that as
mm.
a focus on self-improvement that isn't just thinking about yourself.
Yeah, you're right. It's she's kind of defining this way that she wants to be helpful, and it's her eavesdrop earring. I think when we first heard about it, it was, oh great, this is a tool to spy on your enemies, right? But it's not just that; it's being able to be more attentive to the things that are hurting her friends as well, right? Which I think is great.
Yeah, well, and not just the bad, but the good, like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
gonna help
true.
her focus on where people say the right.
You're right. And part of this is the earring asking her the question, okay, who loves you? Who cares about you? You know,
Yeah.
I am now a tool for you to feel that and notice that more.
Yeah, as an example of it working in a good way, like in practice, I could see, the next time they were in a Bristow class, if that sort of stuff ever happens again, and another student is kind of, bitching under their breath about Bristow, Lucy will hear that, and we can give that student like check marks for being a good person because they hate Bristow.
Yeah, true. Or even just people being like, "Oh shit, Lucy pulled a cool thing in Duracell's class," where
Mm.
that might not be something that they're comfortable saying to her face.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, so yeah, Lucy kind of through this challenge reaffirms her core values. She wants to listen, help, and grow, and it's a good way to assert who she is. And I love that this, like, we've raised the question of Lucy's identity and who she wants to be, and her kind of defining for herself who she wants to be, all the way back through her entire stuff. But more obviously things like the Fey dueling lessons and stuff like that. And this ritual is just a great way for Lucy to make those decisions very tangibly and actively about who she wants to be. I think it's just a great. It's just great.
Yeah. Yeah, it especially because yeah, I just love this concept that growing yourself doesn't always just have to be an inwardly facing thing.
Yeah.
It because this is a story I think that is mostly dealing with the ideas of community and cooperation, like how do people work together?
Mm.
And Lucy is sort of defining her stance on it here, which is like we listen to each other and
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah.
Which is just like it's pretty good strat.
Yep, definitely
Um,
top strats, top tier.
I mean, what I also like about this story though is like I feel like Verona and Avery have slightly different takes on it. Like, they obviously listen to each other, but like, I feel like that's why this story has three protagonists. Because if it's a story about how we work together, you sort of
Mm,
have three people who are different and work differently, and you talk about how different people work together.
mm,
Um, and I can't wait to sort of get these sorts of moments from Avery and Verona. Like maybe not
mm,
so concretely or like, on exactly the same topic, but sort of learning about how they work with people and how it plays off what Lucy's established here.
mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. So I guess summing up Lucy's character, she defines it as I want to be a person that's easier to love and scary to be against, which is just a great single line summary of who Lucy is. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's very Lucy line. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and as she says that line, that's I think when the earring sort of the incorporated earring like fuses into her.
Yes, it finally merges with her. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Which again, like, is a very nice visual, sort of thing that's happening, and then that's just such a great line to sort of end this character journey on because it's
yeah,
so Lucy.
yeah, it's perfect. And so yeah, the episode closes with Lucy merging with the earring Lucy, and then we get a tiny brief teaser on what has happened while they're away, which is that Bristow has seemingly won the war in about 5 minutes flat.
I mean, it does sound like it took a good chunk of the weekend, but it was quite decisive and
Yes,
relatively bloodless.
yeah, a decisive victory for Bristow.
Yeah.
And we shall touch on that in the next chapter.
Yeah, no point
No
no
point
point
discussing
talking
it here.
about
I
it
mean, did
here.
you have an initial reaction to this? What anything that's worth discussing? My initial
Uh,
reaction was kind of like, "What? That can't be right." Basically, um,
I I wasn't surprised in the end because I sort of touched on this in my live read. I actually came into last week's episode and I was about to write the notes like, oh, I'm pretty sure Alexander will win just
mm,
because it would be crazy if he didn't. That would change so much.
yeah,
And then I remembered all the other Wild Bow stories I'd read and I deleted those notes
yeah,
because like it
because changing
yeah
so
these
much is obviously a bit within Wildbow's, modus
yeah
operandi.
Yeah, completely fucking over the status quo. It's very well built. So then, yeah, when it turns out Bristow sort of won, I was like, well, yeah, okay, this actually makes sense.
Yeah,
And it's going to change so much. And I don't think my ideas on it have changed that much from 6.9. So
mm,
I like let's talk about that. Like maybe at the end of that, we can sort of talk about like what we think because we only sort of get a few extra details in 6.9, but the large picture remains kind of the same.
mm, yeah. All right, let's get into it. Cutting class 6.9 from Avery's perspective starts with the trio stepping outside and trying to figure out what has just happened.
Yeah, I love that it's raining as they go outside. Um, Especially because my first thought on this was, wait, has it been raining for like the whole week since they're on the phone with Edith? Like, poor Edith.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, hopefully not. She would be quite bummed out, presumably, if that's the case. Um, yeah. So Avery makes the point that it feels like they're stepping out onto an extinguished battlefield, which is apt. But I kind of was thinking about it, and it feels like they've jumped forward about 100 years in time, and there's this great event that took place, this apocalyptic event of Bristow taking over the school, and everyone only talks about it in hushed whispers, and Avery and the trio are desperately trying to figure out what actually happened to this event, so they can kind of at least comprehend it, if not start to undo some of it. Um, but yeah, it just they just can't. It was only 2 days ago, and nobody's telling them anything that happened.
Yeah, there's real aftermath vibes
Yes.
in all this. Like, there's almost no one around. Those that are in these like small, close groups. They're very wary or they're very aggressive. Like, it kind of feels post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
almost. Like you could see this being the setting of a zombie apocalypse movie. Um, Almost. It's yeah. I mean yeah. Like again, the fact that it's raining. Like I could fully believe that that's the spirits pulling some bullshit because it just feels like the right weather.
Mm.
And I feel like this is the world where in a place that's as rich with magic as this school, the spirits are just like, yeah, this is after a battle, so it needs to be raining so the Kenneteers know that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just playing into the overall vibe of this scenario.
Yeah. Uh, I
Um,
I also love that like Avery quickly compares how she and Verona are going, like after 3 days kind of locked in a room mostly.
mm,
Mostly just because like Avery feels really gross and like she needs to start taking care of herself again. And she just sort of knows Verona's just fine. Like,
yep.
Verona's body is pretty used to not having a routine or getting taken care of. So she's just, about the same as she was, whereas Avery, is sort of very fit, takes care of herself when she's falling apart.
Yeah, really not happy with it. Yeah, Snowdrop, of course, seems to also be doing fine. Seems to have spent this weekend doing the best possible thing she could have, which is just sleeping all day.
Which is good. I mean, I worry for Snowdrop sleeping because they're often dragging her around during the day, but she's nocturnal, and so she's always out at night as well.
Mm,
I've always worried she's not getting enough sleep.
yeah, probably. Um, so yeah, we like. I think we should touch on the fact that nobody seems to be telling them what's going on. People are intentionally being, mysterious about it. I kind of like it. It gives this vibe of like, it gives it a bit of vibe that it's actually not yet over. Like people aren't willing to comment on it because it's still kind of taking place to some extent.
Yeah, totally.
And I guess we'll get to that later because while one side is keen to claim victory, it definitely feels like there's still stuff going on in this battle, right?
Yeah, maybe a little. What? Yeah, let's wait till the end to talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get to that later, I suppose. So yeah, the trio stumble around the empty campus, seeing very little people until they come across Timon caring for his familiar Dreg.
Yeah. So obviously, apparently, Dreg copped it. I like how they start to have a conversation with Timon because obviously, we've seen him before. Um, and there's a lot to talk about here, but the first one I wanted to pull out was he kind of gets really impressed by how specialized their sight is.
Mm,
And he sort of says usually that stuff is like hard to do to train yourself, or it's like
yeah,
pricey.
high level technique.
Yeah, which is just, again, another reminder that the Kenneteers are weirdly powerful. Um, but also, one of the things Timon says here is he would usually have to tap his black gutter spirit for a sight like that. And whenever he does that, it, channels into him. So it's sort of a risk. It reminded me of like Matthew with the Doom, like where everything you sort of do when you're getting the power from that thing is it gets its claws further into you.
Mm,
And that jumped out to me because I was sort of thinking, like, the Kenneteers don't seem to have anything like that, right? Like, we see a lot of people who in this world whose power is, very defined by what they're interacting with, like,
yes.
or where they get their power from. It sort of shapes them.
Yeah.
Um, but the Kenneteers seemingly just kind of get this free power on tap, and it doesn't change them, at least as far as we're aware.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few possibilities for that, right? One is just the fact that they've tapped so directly into willing others is a new paradigm that's just way stronger. It's a real like, laughter is 10 times more powerful than screams moment from Monsters Inc., right? Um, the other option
Yeah.
is because they awakened as a group that potentially is kind of spreading out any adverse effects as well. And
Well,
presumably
I
both
think
those things in concert makes them as powerful as they are.
I think it might sort of be the other way around, where it's because they're getting it from all the others of Kennet. So it's like
True. Yes.
it's not the black gutter or the doom that's infecting them. It's this kind of mixture of all the things which kind of nulls it out and just turns it into
Into
clean
yeah,
power.
clean renewable resource.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Or
and
especially, it might even be going through Kennet, like because the others give power to Kennet, and
right,
then as the practitioners of Kennet, they kind of get the power. So that
maybe
buffer
it's
of getting their
filtered.
power
Yeah,
from the town and from their role.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I'm assuming there's going to be some not hidden, but just emerging consequences that come from this that we haven't fully seen yet.
yeah,
In terms of their power and the potential downsides to it. But I guess we will see that as the story continues.
yeah.
Um, cool. So yeah, I want to point out one moment from this conversation that just made me laugh a huge amount, which is just like they're talking about Timon Timon, whatever, is kind of talking about their house, and the fact that who is it? Georgia, is that the name of the younger sister?
Yeah,
Is having a really rough time, and mentions the house and how she wants to go back there, and Verona is like, "Ooh, your house? Oh, how big is it? How big is it? Oh, is it a domain?" And it's just so tactless that it cracks me up that Verona has just whiffed on that so hard. Oh, it's
yeah. I love
classic.
how Lucy has to elbow her and just sort of straight up says, remember empathy?"
Yeah,
Like
she's
that thing.
Verona. Yeah,
Um,
it's hilarious.
God, Alexander Jr. over here. Um, yeah, I mean, it's good. Like, I really like this moment where Timon sort of refuses to, like, talk to them about how Drake got injured.
Mm,
Because it's sort of like Lucy's like, "Oh, how did he get injured?" And she clearly, like, sort of wants to help, but Timon's like, "Well, you just sort of refuse to tell us what your deal is, so I hope you'll understand if I'm sort of the same." And she's like, "Yeah, I mean, I don't like that, but fair."
yeah.
Um, and because yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like we've just sort of been talking about, you know, how cool it is that the Kenneteers can kind of work together, and Lucy does her listening, and they get this power for free that lets them do stuff. But then there's as soon as we start interacting with other practitioners, suddenly there has to be all these little guards up.
Mm,
And, like this
yeah.
is still a relatively good interaction, but both sides kind of just by the nature of how practitioners interact have to hold things back.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like this is one of the most friendly conversations we've seen with just a random neutral party that isn't like Nicolette or Zed, right? Um,
Yeah.
and it's just sad that there's always this literal wall between it, right?
Mm. Yeah, it is. Like, and that's, I mean, I think that sort of stuff is kind of the core problem as to why people in this world can't work together well.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the in-universe reason for this. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
but like,
still trust that our characters will manage to unite everyone in happy harmony.
yeah, but the problem is if you try to do that and have everyone be open, all it takes is one dickhead, bad faith actor to screw everyone over.
Mm,
Like, it's such an easy thing to ruin. So it's not that simple, unfortunately. I don't know.
mm,
I'm interested to see where it might go.
yeah. So during this conversation, Jarvis and Silas, who are two Bristow loyalists, come over and basically just start throwing their weight around.
Yeah, just sort of blatantly, like, bullying everyone and, like, coercing, this sense of, like, you have to be Team Bristow or die.
Mm-hmm. 100%. It feels like that. It's get on board or get lost, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, we find out here, and we'll touch on this later, I guess, but we find out that America, what's her surname? America
Ted.
Ted, that's it, got expelled. And this immediately is strange to me because she didn't seem like an Alexander loyalist or anything. She just seemed kind of chaotic. But as we'll learn later, this was a very interesting thing that happened, and we don't really have a good explanation for why. So I'm assuming this is going to play into something important later, but it's so strange.
We get a hint at their motivation later, because that has to do with Liberty and having her rise to the family because I guess she's more controllable
But that
as the younger
feels like
one.
the reaction. I guess let's just jump to talking about this now because why not? What happens
Sure.
is, from what it seems like, is they basically decide that they're gonna take America down, expel her, and then attack her, right? And she has no real recourse except to bail. Um, and that's such an extreme reaction to take for potentially manipulating a sister that doesn't necessarily feel like she would be easy to manipulate. I don't know, like what
Yeah.
yeah, I guess it doesn't. It feels like there must be more going on here.
I I don't know. I think this is just like Bristow is encouraging this bullshit tribalism
True.
uh on his side, and I think this is just a bit of a side effect of that. Like because especially like the Teds are, as these sort of as you said, chaotic like goblin things, like they were never going to fall in line.
Yeah.
So, like, I think that's probably where it comes in. Like,
Yeah.
I could never see the goblins, just being productive members of a cult. They always sort of have to fight authority.
Mm.
I mean, because it's no surprise that it was like a one of the Goblin princesses and one of these Henniggers that managed to get expelled because they seem like the easy groups to trick into doing something violent.
Yeah. True.
Um,
Mm.
because like one of my first thoughts when it was like, oh, America and one of the Henniggers got expelled. Like, what? I'll admit, my first thought was, oh no, what a big loss.
I don't know. The fact that they got expelled kind of retroactively makes me like them more because they were
Yeah,
presumably pissing Bristow off.
yeah. I mean, yes, exactly. But also, it's just like expelling and like isolating these people further isn't really going to solve any
Not
problems.
going to chill them out, is it? You'd think.
No, exactly. It's just going to put them on their own and make them do more stupid shit.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Anywho.
and like to speak about the tribalism and the you're either with us or against us bullshit.
Mm,
Jarvis and Silas place tons of emphasis on like the networking and connections that comes up later in the chapter. Like they're
mm,
this yeah, we'll talk about that politics stuff even more later, but like you can really see how Bristow is helping to create this culture. Like, these two come up and they're basically like, "Hey, you started to form a connection with Yadira and Raquel. You should go and work on that one and not this one here because that's the one that's going to matter." Like it's yeah, like they're just so blatantly sort of saying, "Hey, here are some people on our side that you don't hate. You better go be friends with them and no one else."
mm, mm. Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
this mostly just stands out because the Kennedys go and do the exact fucking opposite. They go and see all their Alexander-related
Yeah, they
friends at the
basically
end of the
start a
chapter.
rebellion by the end of this chapter. Um, yeah, but we'll get to that. So
Yeah,
yeah, mm,
but yeah, these two specifically sort of say, "Hey, you need to pick which connections you're going to foster because that really matters right now." And the Kennedys are sort of like, "Yep, okay,"
yeah,
and they go and see all the people who have been sort of kicked out,
yeah. I mean, they
like that.
take that message to heart, but just not in the
Yeah,
way that I think
exactly.
Silas and Jarvis want.
Hmm.
So yeah, Avery notices that something strange is happening with Silas's connections. Seems like he's up to something, so she sneakily works to get the girls out of the conversation.
Yeah, it's very clever by Avery how she, manages to sort of run away tactically like this. Um, but like I love this idea. So what we sort of get from the brainstorming session later is that they figure out Silas is presumably able to freeze his connection to people. So if you spend enough time around him, wherever you're at that point, he kind of freezes you in that spot against him. So if you're
Yeah,
his enemy or his friend, you kind of get stuck there.
yeah. He kind of locks down your relationship to him, which
Yeah.
is raised briefly that it might not necessarily be the most useful power, but there are some obvious advantages to it. But again, I don't know how strong that is.
Well,
uh,
yeah, I mean, there's a strength in the predictability that Verona brings up that I like, but I mostly love this as just an embodiment of this bullshit tribalism. Like
yes,
Silas literally puts a ticking clock on you choosing sides because
yes.
if you've been around him for long enough, you're going to end up on a side whether you want to or not.
Yeah, he forces you to be on a side and then stay on that side, which must be so annoying.
Yeah, yeah, that's the most toxic bullshit part of it is that if he's frozen it, unless he's got some way of like unfreezing it and refreezing it, which I don't know if he does, like, you're not allowed to change. Um, which just, that's that toxic part of tribalism. It's like, oh no, you were born on the blue side, so, fuck you forever.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Um, Silas, he's such a creep. Anyway, so this bit where Avery kind of gets the team out of the situation is such a perfect example of one, how well the team gels, and two, how well Lucy's earring slots into their kind of dynamics, right? So Avery and Snowdrop get themselves out of the situation first, and then Lucy overhears Avery mentioning this is a trap and kind of extracts herself from Verona as well. And it's just great. There's always just like they just work so well as a team. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Like we sort of touched on how Timon is always talking about how powerful they are. Um, like for me, it's that versatility that really is their biggest strength, and like that's sort of what we see here is Avery's skill set allows her to see that Silas is fucking shit up, and then she's able to use the skills of the other two to set up a situation where they can get out.
Mm,
And again, this is a story that's talking about how we work together, and that's what we see here is their real strength comes from the fact that they work well as a team with all of their strengths combined.
mm, yeah, they're great. They're such a great team. It's awesome. Consistently awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, they talk about this Silas connection thing a bit, but Verona gets distracted obsessing over how the earring works, which again, classic Verona. She gets very engaged in figuring it out and kind of plans a potential suite of tests that they can run to, establish the rules behind it and what its limits are, which is very scientific and great. Although, just based on how this world works, I expect they won't be able to get super hard and firm rules on it. But sure, it'll be fun to dive into.
Yeah, I think Verona's smart enough to know that she's not going to be able to do tests that are like, oh yes, it has a 50-meter range.
Yeah,
Um, like this is a world where it's going to have a lot more to do with the emotions, but you could build rules out of trends. Like, oh, it works better in these situations. Like,
yeah,
um, Lucy already starts to describe how it feels. Like, so she can hear whispers, but not the loud things, sort
yeah,
of through it. So it's like, the earring is specifically sort of helping her eavesdrop, basically, or helping her get the information she would miss.
yeah.
Um, but then also, like, it doesn't just do sounds. Like she talks about noticing changes in people's posture and how they react to things. Like it's all that stuff she's talking about. Like it's enhancing herself. It's like she's from that show Lie to Me. Like she's getting the ability to sort of just read people's body language.
Mm. Yeah, true. It's definitely. I mean, immediately we're seeing all the cool benefits that it's bringing for seemingly no downside beyond the fact that they had to spend 2 days doing it. So it's great stuff. Great decision to
Yeah,
do.
yeah, absolutely. Like we were sort of introduced to this idea in terms of like seeing these big three rituals as like level up rituals.
Mm,
And like, I'm feeling that right now because it feels like Lucy has just kinda gotten a free permanent boost.
mm. Yeah,
Well, not free, I mean, she did have to work for it, but
yeah, but
you know what I mean.
definitely. I mean, it didn't. It doesn't seem like there's been a huge permanent downside to it. Not that we've seen yet, at least, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so yeah, the Kennedys find their way to the town, in air quotes, this small little collection of buildings, and find the refugees from the school hiding out at the gas station, basically. Gas station
yeah.
slash ice cream store.
I love there's a very, like, the genre, like, kids on bikes,
Mm,
like the Stranger Things, Stephen King book
yeah,
sort of show. Like that, I very much got kids on bikes vibes from how this all sort of opens. Like it's just three kids walking along the road, like just sort of moving out of the way of cars. Um, it's a very good genre, so I love seeing it sort of tapped into.
yeah, definitely. It's got that strong vibe.
But yeah, and then God, yeah. So they get to this town, and like, man, everyone just feels beaten down, don't they? Like there's such a hopelessness to all this.
Mm. Yeah, it does feel weirdly hopeless, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, I still feel like I'm in disbelief that the big problem with this to me is we get no information on what Alexander did, to the extent that it almost seems like he actually just did nothing. He just kind of left and Bristow took over, right? Or
Hmm.
Bristow took over and Alexander left immediately. Like, it doesn't feel like anything actually happened beyond the fact that we know that that Dreg got injured somehow. We don't really know anything that took place from Alexander's perspective. We find out all the ways that he was, all the moves that Bristow made, right? We find out Durocher has stepped back. We found out that Nicolette and a few of the other augurs all got turned. But yeah, Alexander seemingly has done nothing in response, and it gives it this weird, incomplete feeling. And it's called out in the text by some of the students thinking that Alexander's still gonna have his second coming and return and do some big masterstroke that sorts it all out. And I kind of feel the same way. It's very strange.
I I've been resisting actually making this comparison for a while, but I can't not do it right now. Like I can't help but for quite a while now have just viewed Bristow as the Republicans and Alexander as the Democrats.
Yeah, okay. Explain it.
And like, well, what you're saying right now, it's like Alexander, he just feels like he did nothing. Um
Mm,
Yeah, like, I mean, because like to sort of build on that metaphor a bit more, I guess, like the school. One of the big things we start to talk about in this section is like there's sort of political ramifications to what goes on in this school that will affect the whole area. Like, all sorts of power is going to move around. This is going to affect everyone, and not just like the other practitioners who are sort of the 1% or whatever, but like that will cascade to the innocents presumably and everyone else. Um, and when we've got the premise of this story is we're basically dealing with a murder of someone like on the a kind of equivalent to the Supreme Court. I think was the comparison we made early on. It
Mm,
feels like these uh, issues going on over here in the executive branch tie into that thematically.
mm. So okay, so we've got Bristow Republicans, Alexander Democrats. In that he's still obviously a huge dick, but one that you feel slightly better about him being in charge.
Yeah,
So
I mean, yeah,
what's
I don't know how deep I want to dive into this being like
okay?
the exact metaphor, if that
You've
makes
said
sense.
it. You
Like
can't
you,
take it back, Elliot.
no,
So
okay.
this is the 2016 election playing out. Is that what we're seeing?
I mean, yeah, I would be willing to say that this is comparable to 2016 in the timeline of things.
Mm. So therefore, what's going to happen next?
Well, hopefully in this story, like the Kenneteers are gonna like fix
Turn
it.
it
I mean, like
around.
yeah, like to jump ahead in my notes a little bit, like I can't wait to see where Alexander has ended up in all of this because I'm actually kind of hoping he doesn't have a master stroke or any
Mm,
ideas because what would be great for me is basically he has to go to the Kenneteers and the Kenneteers can get to do their like they could actually sort of fix Alexander because it's like, oh, we'll help you and we're gonna help you, but like you have to promise to stop being a dick.
mm,
Because the more this has gone on, the closer I felt to thinking, oh, Alexander might actually be redeemable. And it's when he's had his power taken away like this, that's like the perfect time to
true.
do that to him.
To
Like this
redeem
is the
him.
time where you could say, hey, get your shit in order and we'll help you like take this back and do it properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I still can't believe that Alexander has just been so passive in this entire setup of this fight. Right, when we first got to the BHI, we've seen Alexander take one step against Bristow, and that was kind of taking over his coup claim class. Right, God, that's a tongue twister.
Mm.
Um, he's just done nothing actively, and I can't believe that that would happen. He's too smug to just do nothing, you know?
Or is that the whole point? He was too smug. Maybe he thought, like, yeah. I feel like what this may come down to is the idea that Bristow managed to steal so many of the
Of the
um,
augurs.
well, yeah, the apprentices.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
they were
even
probably
though even with that, I just can't see it, you know? Like
yeah. I guess we'll see.
Alexander is he's been set up as and not just set up, but clearly characterized as powerful and a good augur. And the interactions that we've had with him outside of the school of the stuff of when we were in the Forest Ribbon Trail and all that stuff, he clearly knows what's going on. He's clearly got his shit together. I can't believe that he would be so easily beaten. It just doesn't compute to me. Like it just has to be. You just have to get your tinfoil hats on because there's no other explanation.
I mean, to present like a possible counterexample in universe. I mean, we know Bristow was working with another circle of augurs. So
Mm,
if anyone was going to be able to dodge augur related stuff, like maybe they were helping him dodge Alexander's stuff. I don't
mm.
know, or
I
like
just can't
mislead
believe it.
Alexander.
I just can't believe it. And outside of the narrative as well, I just can't believe that if this is it, if this is the confrontation, we just didn't see it at all, right? Like, unless we go back and see an interlude where Alexander loses, I'm just not going to buy that it's over. Even if the story ends, I'm going to not buy it.
um, yeah. See, I don't know. Like, I'm sure he had subtle things going or whatever, but like they probably just fell apart under like Bristow's brutish takeover. Like,
Mm,
kind of the fairy versus goblin sort of thing. I think Bristow just came in and so like simply did things like take apprentices or whatever that it probably just undermined the stuff Alexander had going.
mm. I mean, maybe. I don't know. Or we're just going to talk around it in circles until we get the Alexander interlude next chapter, I think. So
No,
yeah,
I've still got my money. I've still got my money on this upcoming interlude being a brownies interlude.
if it's going to be a meme interlude, Elliot, it's going to be Sig, okay? Not brownies.
I don't think the brownies are a meme interlude. I actually
Oh,
think that
they
makes sense.
are. Come on.
No way. They're the people like in the school. Like they've got so much to show us.
Mm,
Like, you're talking about wanting an interlude that shows us everything that happened in the
you're
school.
right.
No one's better positioned to
Yeah,
see everything than the brownies.
they would definitely know the goings on, goings ons.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the chapter ends with the Kenneteers kind of reaffirming that Bristow's too much of a dickhead to stay in charge. Basically, like if Bristow was just a bit nicer, the Kenneteers would probably be totally fine with him being in charge. But he's actually just too much of an asshole, so they can't let it stand.
Yeah. But there's this bit where like Bristow's like cronies come into the town
Yes, sorry, we skipped over
as
that.
as a sort of part of this because I just want to say I feel so sorry for this very small town that's near the Blue Heron Institute because they clearly cop so much of the like overflow bullshit.
Yeah, they picked a bad place to set up because there's just going to be a heap of practitioner shenanigans taking place nearby.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, the Bristow loyalists are huge assholes, and so the Kenneteers vow to seed the rebellion and start kind of building their allegiances, I guess. And that's where the chapter ends. And I suspect that's probably where the arc is going to end as well, right? It feels like an end of an arc point.
Yeah, we were just sort of talking about what the next chapter's gonna be like in terms of an interlude. Like we
Yeah,
both seem to be
it's a
working off the
foregone
assumption
conclusion. Yeah.
that we're about to like we are both making that assumption. So we could just be wrong, could just be 6.10.
Yeah.
But it feels like we're ready for an interlude to set up this conflict even more.
Mm. Yeah, I still strongly believe it's the time for the Alexander interlude, but we'll see.
um, yeah, one last point I want to bring up with Alexander and all that because what I found really hilarious about why Alexander seems to be losing is because when he lost all his apprentices, he now had too many commitments he had to meet. So he's like, he has too much other stuff to do, and that's given
Mm.
Bristow like more freedom to do his bullshit. And just like if we go right back to 2.x, like Nicolette's interlude, um, how Alexander was always like trying to eat up her time. There was a bit of karmic joy for me in the fact that Alexander has been beaten by overcommitting himself to all these commitments, like he was trying to do to Nicolette.
True. I mean, it would be a poetic end. Unfortunately, it's not the end. I'm sure.
No, I don't think it'll be the end, but like I feel a bit of justice knowing that he's been hurt in this way because of he was doing this to Nicolette.
Mm.
Um, I mean, Nicolette is someone I can't wait to check in with after this because, like, we talked about this way back in her interlude. Like, she had this augur circle, and she's kind of convinced, oh, when I can get out of here and sell information to the augur circle or whatever, like, my life will suddenly be fantastic.
Mm.
Um, and now she's kind of got there with Bristow's help from the looks of it. Like, it's all just so I can't wait to see where she's at because I'm convinced she's not going to actually be happy with what's happened, at least long term.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Mm.
Like, yeah, like this August Circle. I mean, they're the sort of people who work with Bristow. They've got to be like
They've got to be
shitheads.
horrible. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I yeah. Well, let's not talk in circles right now. We'll get it in the interlude next chapter. We'll find out where this story's taking this next. I actually just can't predict it, so let's not try.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, we'll get into the extra material, which is binding and countermeasures. The trio have left notes on how they might bind the Kennet others.
Woohoo! Candid others.
Yay! Oh
Less
god,
woohoo. Binding them.
it's rough. It's so like tragic, right? Like the whole vibe is just the Kenneteers clearly hating that they have to plan for this eventuality, or one of these eventualities needing to take place. But it's clearly necessary, and so you just feel the tragedy of them needing to think about how they would murder their friends, essentially.
Yeah, like again, we're sort of touched on this. The Kenneteers have this really good sort of connection with all the Kennet others.
Yeah.
Mostly because there's this one toxic side where, and this has been the shadow overhanging their relationship with the Kennet others right from day one, which is one of them's a murderer who they sort of need to try and bring to justice.
Yeah, it is just these are your best friends. One of them is secretly a murderer. Good luck. Like
Yeah,
it's there's yeah yeah, and that leads to these really awkward things like, oh, you have to figure out how you might betray and kill your friends if you need to, and that's just kind of a part of your life.
yeah, and look, I mean, I think that's just realistic. Like
Yes, you
you will
can't
always
blame them
have
for having to make this choice.
no, exactly, and you'll always like have some reason not to trust the people you're around. Like as much as I'd love it, we can't just have some perfectly rosy relationship with the group of others. Like there always have
Yeah,
to be some reason you can't trust them 100%, and that
yeah,
to some extent always means you have to look into what you'll do. And I think it's how you handle that that's going to be so interesting to explore.
yeah, definitely. Um, yep.
I mean, just from a bit of a more meta point, I love how this extra material being placed here helps sort of keep us in touch with Kennet and the others that are there. Like, I think, despite the fact we've kind of spent this whole arc at the Blue Heron Institute, I think the story's doing a very good job at like keeping its finger on the pulse of Kennet. Like, we call Matthew and Edith.
Mm,
We get extra material like this that kind of goes through every character that is in Kennet, so that we don't forget them.
mm,
It's really nice.
yeah, it's good stuff. Um,
We also get to practice our practice skills here with like, kind of problem solving. How would we bind these
yeah.
people?
What would you do
Like
in these situations?
as much as it sucks, it is kind of fun to problem solve, like taking this imagery of people and trying to figure that out.
Trying to figure out the potential weaknesses from it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
like not to go full Verona on everyone, but I found this very fun.
yes. So they start with Matthew and Edith.
Yeah. And something I kind of want to talk about at the start of this one, but like also overall, like I love that the Kennetys are like, in part because they hate this, they're giving it the appropriate weight. Like they sort of open this by saying, "Oh, we want to, do this with the approval of the other Kennet others or one of the big four or big three at the moment."
Mm,
Like they don't feel like rogue vigilantes, but they want to go through the proper authorities and make sure that they're doing this for the right reasons. And I
mm,
feel like binding is such an invasive, controlling thing to do that
mm.
I like this idea of thinking, well, if we're going to have to do this, let's make sure we, you know, don't just run into it ourselves when we think it's right, but we actually, reach out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. If you're going to make the decision to do this, you really need to make sure you have it all, planned out properly.
Yeah, yeah, and that it's not just like going rogue. Like
Yes.
they don't want to be vigilantes. They want to make sure they're doing this right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. But so sorry to go back to Matthew and Edith.
Yeah.
I hadn't it hadn't ever really occurred to me how mechanically kind of similar Matthew and Edith are until we saw them here like this. Um,
Yeah, I hadn't either, but you're right. It's a human-ish body in with a spirit inside it, more or less, right?
yeah, they're just sort of on different sides of this spectrum between like it kind of seems like you're a host if it's mostly human with a strong other inside, and you're a
Mm.
vessel if it's mostly an other with a weak human inside, and
Yeah.
they're just sort of both skirting around that line.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Which means that they are mechanically similar to bind, which is nice and convenient for the Kentiers, I suppose. Although
Yeah.
I feel like they're probably the most complex to handle. It seems like they'd be fairly difficult, but there's a lot of, I guess, thematic ideas listed that would form the basis of the binding that would be done here.
Yeah, I think what my favorite part of the extra material is, alongside all of the brainstorming, like I love this sort of list of numbers to include in the binding circle and why. The fact that presumably Avery, who put this together, has drawn like little examples of all the like symbols they want to use for all the others is just really cool.
Mm,
Um, they're also intricate and complex. Like I was just very impressed that Walbo was able to put these together, um, as well as Avery. Yeah, just I thought I was really impressed by the quality of the circles and diagrams in this extra material.
mm, yeah, yeah. Speaking of, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but speaking of diagrams, I guess it's not quite a diagram, but this image that's here of Matthew with the doom hiding inside him, kind of tearing him open, so good, such a powerful representation of who Matthew is. I loved it. It was great.
I I didn't know if that was specifically meant to be Matthew or if it's just like a picture of a host or a vessel,
Oh, sure.
like traced from a textbook. But like, yeah, you're right. Either way, like it's a very evocative image of like how you could sort of view others and or hosts and vessels.
Mm. Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was very powerful.
Yeah, but yeah, to sort of talk about like Matt and Edith in general. I love this idea that because you kind of need to bind the human and the other. They can sort of lean into whichever one causes the binding more problems. Um, and that made me think like I was ready to go all conspiracy theory on like Matt and how this relates to him and the Doom and stuff, and that kind of gets covered at the end of this extra material.
Mm,
Um, but I don't know that we've ever given enough thought to like Edith and the girl by candlelight and how much of each makes up the Edith that we see.
mm,
If you know what I mean, because like we know that there are bits of Edith James still in there, but I've always kind of worked off the assumption that the girl by candlelight is like
is the main
behind the wheel.
presence. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But like I wonder where that balance sits. Like I kind of always assumed it was the girl by candlelight doing 99% of the existing and Edith James was mostly a dead body with some imprints left on it. But yeah, the longer the girl by candlelight spends inside Edith, I wonder if lines blur there or yeah, I don't know. Like I guess I got my tinfoil hat on a lot with Edith because it seems extremely likely at this point that she's involved.
Yes, heavily
Um,
involved, I would say. Yeah, and you're right. The fact that there is a dichotomy to her gives her another potential out to like questions of like truth telling and stuff, right? Like, oh, did Edith
yeah,
kill the Carmine Beast? No, Edith didn't kill the Carmine Beast. Stuff like that, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, I think when that came up in Edith's interview, she talked about how she, the girl by candlelight, like hopped out of the body and
Yep.
nothing external got into the body. And somebody on our Discord, I think it was sort of talking about, well, maybe Edith James just took over her own body and did something. Um,
Yeah.
which I don't think I agree with, just because
Doesn't
there
seem
were
possible, but
yeah, I don't know if Edith James is that strong. And then also, like we got in the recent Alcazar thing, it had the glowing yellow eyes, the Edith that we saw in that. So that implies to me the girl by candlelight is still inside. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think the concept of the identity of the girl by candlelight versus Edith is something I want to keep thinking about because I feel like that'll be important, not just to how they might have done it, but like why. Because I feel like there'll be more to this than just like, the obvious motivation Edith's had since chapter, like, 2 of
mm,
this story would have
mm.
been, "I'm a fleeting spirit. I'm on, like, the bottom of the social totem pole that the universe has put me on. I want to upgrade myself."
Well, upgrade myself and potentially Matthew, right? Like they're both
Yeah.
kind of in that circumstance.
Yeah, but, like, I assume there's gonna be more to it than that,
Mm.
and I'm just wondering, like, there's Edith James, there's the girl by candlelight, there's the Doom, like, how do all these pieces fit together to make a more complex motivation? I haven't quite managed to put it together, but, um, it's so interesting to think about.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's where the story is going, but we will see exactly why it is what it is, I guess.
Mm. Well,
Uh,
and yeah, and like how Matthew fits into that, I think is going to be so interesting. Like how on board with it all was he? Um, to jump ahead a bit, like the end of this extra material kind of reminds us that like Matthew is as bound by the Doom as the Doom is by him.
mm,
And so, how much is he kind of stuck with what's happened just because he has no options without
mm,
letting the Doom out?
mm. Yeah, I guess we can touch on that a bit more at the end.
Sure.
So yeah, next up we get to Alpi. They discuss how they might bind Alpi.
Yeah, and I love how the excerpts from books they have here are like just so intense compared to Alpi. Like they all paint pictures of like night hags that like attack people and are like evil,
Yeah,
and that's just so funny because like Alpi's always sort of been like this like chill, happy go lucky like centrist
yeah.
in
I
the
mean, she's
story.
so chill that yeah.
Whereas like, the books would have you think of night hags or whatever. It's like, these villains that are going to attack innocent people. And she's just like, nah, the universe tells me to give them bad dreams, so I do.
Mhm. Yep. The discussion of this binding got to me. It feels very cruel, right? Like, I mean, I guess any binding is cruel, but this one is like starving her to death and then binding her, and also binding her by like in a very domineering way, forcing her to submit to your will. Like, oh, it's just very gross. I mean, all the bindings are
Yeah.
gross, but some of them are just especially horrifying.
Yeah, as we sort of said, the core concept of binding is kind of controlling and invasive. Um, but some of these ones feel doubly more so. Like my favorite part about the Alpi one, for a certain use of the term favorite, is that one of them sort of has to stay there and look at her for the binding. Like it has to be a very intimate sort of thing. You can't just like do it remote.
Mm,
Um, which because Alpi is the one that especially Verona and Avery like both really like. So you can't get out of needing to bind her by keeping your distance. One of you is going to have to be right there and like engaging with her and watching her the whole time, which just is horrifying.
mm, yeah. Yeah, it's the worst. It's horrifying. Although it is a little funny that one strategy for binding is to just throw a puzzle at Alpi and demand that she solves it, which is a nice bit of levity to bring us back up after the horrifying binding that we would need to do to her.
You're right, it balances that out a bit. It does remind me, like, remember we did a monster corner on bears back when we still had time to do bonus bits, and we had that whole list of crazy ways you could bind mares, like or put off mares, like inviting them to breakfast and stuff.
Mm,
This feels like that.
yeah. Yep. Just weird little things. Anyway, next up on the discussion of how to bind is Fairy, e.g., Guillemay and Marisica.
Yeah, I mean, I love the concept of binding fairies because it feels
Mm.
simultaneously very easy, but also just fucking impossible.
Yeah, and I get this vibe from it as well, where they kind of discuss like, oh, it might just be doomed to fail if we attempt to bind a Fae. But that
Yeah.
kind of feels like they're playing into this aura of mystique that Fairy obviously cultivate about themselves as a defense mechanism. Like the fact that they think it's possibly too hard is just them playing into the shenanigans of the Fae, right?
These are these mind games that I just can't engage in. As soon as you get to, but that's what they want me to think.
Yeah, sure.
Like I'm already sort of out because like you're totally right that like how much of that is just the fairy trying to make it harder by convincing you it is.
Mm,
Because this is a world where expectations and patterns matter, and if the fairy go around telling everyone that they're very hard because to bind because they're very tricky, then that might start to become true.
yeah, definitely. And that's what the Fairy are playing into, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we also get a little reminder here as well that Marcy gave them all those gifts and told them there was like a trap for each of them, and we haven't quite figured out what those were. So just I like this little reminder that hey, that's a plot thread that's still out there.
Mm. Yeah. um, yeah, the trap stuff. I mean, that's they kind of say, okay, there's no point to us thinking about how to bind them. Let's just worry about the traps. Maybe that is the trap, right? Maybe that's part of the trap. I don't know. Again, we're diving down that circular chain of
Yeah,
logic.
yeah. Yeah, like, and my worry there is against the fairy, you don't resurface. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like using this as an excuse, and I've kind of been doing this already to talk about the fairy, like, or just talk about the Kennet others that we haven't seen for a while. So, like something I wanted to bounce around with you and think about more is like, so if Guillemay is on the verge of falling to winter, like the fairies see falling to winter as death, but we've learnt now that they're a winter fairy and they have their own things. Like it's not just becoming a statue; it is still being a fairy, but just one that kind of acts a bit more predictably.
Mm.
So if Guillemay is like falling to winter, what does that like look like? Like he's not just going to die, but
Yeah,
he's
he's
going
not just
to
going to be gone forever, right?
yeah, like he's still going to be a tricky fairy, just one that's always pulling the same tricks. So like is he falling into this role or this pattern of being the mentor, like we've talked about? Or like does it change when he falls to winter? Because obviously like Silas's stuff had like it was like freezing the connection, so that was like wintry imagery. So does Guillemay physically change as part of it? Like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Like they talk about it as though him falling to winter is a potential advantage, but presumably being a winter fae comes with its own set of, strengths and weaknesses. Like it's not just he's almost dead and so it'll be much easier to bind him or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I
Oh,
guess
but
we don't know
even
enough,
outside
do we?
well, even outside of the binding, like, what does that look like for his relationship with the Kenneteers? Like,
Yeah.
is him falling to winter, is that
Does that mean he'll
yeah,
leave Kennet? Like is that going to happen? Does it mean they have to
yeah.
like put him down? What does it mean?
Or is him becoming, like, the wise old mentor of Kennet, his Winterfell form, like, that he's
Interesting.
starting to slip into, you know?
Interesting. I like that idea. Although it doesn't necessarily seem super consistent with what we've learned of Winterfell.
Yeah, but again, like, Gilly is someone who, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's very typical for Faye to be part of a town like Kennet.
Yeah, true. So
Also,
maybe he
like,
kind of breaks the rules a bit.
yeah, we don't know enough about Fairy to know that exactly what the rules are around this stuff.
Mm,
Because like Mars is the other one. Like I've always sort of wondered what is Marissa doing in Kennet?
mm,
And we had that thing like she wanted to steal the note from Guillerme, but like, did she come to Kennet to do that?
mm.
Or was she already here and that just became her mission because she needed something to do?
Uh, who can answer these questions? You know?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm asking hypothetical, rhetorical questions, but
Yeah.
to focus in on Marcy, one of the things I noticed it is brought up here, and I recently reheard in my Arc Two like reread that I'm doing right now. Maricica's a very young fairy,
Mm,
and like I feel like that's important because like it contrasts her a lot with Guillerme, who's this fairy who's like on the verge of going through fairy death. Um, but Marisica, it's also said like she was born to Darkfall Court, and
mm,
that's actually quite rare. And like that's a court that's all about changing things and sort of going against the status quo. And so she's born to it. She's kind of new and fresh. Like she says in Arc Two, she's still trying to learn what her goal in life is. Like, where does she see herself? Like, she was the other person who was associated with the coin. Like, she's one of our other lead suspects alongside Edith. And I just, again, it's the same as Edith. I'm trying to put all these pieces together. Like, we have Mariska. She's this young, fresh fairy who presumably wants to make a splash. And what does that mean or look like for how she's interacting with the Carmine Beast?
mm. Yeah, I don't know. We can. Marissa is the other person I think that seems the most suspicious, second to Edith, right? Um,
Yeah.
and we can make assumptions about what her motivations are, but I I don't feel like we've gotten any new pieces of information. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
thinking about it, and I have no fucking clue.
I mean, I guess I would like. I'm thinking of tying it back to what Miss was thinking at the end of 5.d about how like this Carmine Beast thing feels like it's going to be one of those precedents for changing the fundamental order of the world.
Mm,
Where like the death of the Carmine Beast is going to be something that's looked back on as a precedent, and we talked about how that might fit in with practitioners taking over more and more of the um like the jurisdiction than they were meant to have.
mm.
I guess if Marissa is this sort of very young new fairy who's all about like change, she seems like the perfect person to be motivated to
To
challenge.
put that into
Yeah,
action. Mm,
yeah, to be someone who wants to challenge the status quo. I think she's explicitly said like she's someone who wants to challenge the status quo, and
yeah,
is this her doing
is this
that
her doing
on
that?
a very
Yeah,
big scale? Yeah.
yeah, true. Um, Yeah, maybe. um, so next we get what is, in my opinion, possibly the saddest one: How to Bind John. This one's really sad because it seems like it's actually quite simple to bind John. Like they could actually pretty easily bind him, and it would just be so cruel. Like John is so consistently nice, and the thing that really makes it land for me is this has happened to all the other members of John's squad, and that's why he's alone. Like,
Yeah.
it's just tragic.
Yeah, you're right. This segment is just simple and tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like every time we've kind of thought bad of John, it's usually been a misunderstanding. Like there was the whole thing with the Hungry Choir being Yolda. Turns out he didn't know.
Mm,
There was that time he like held guns to their faces the first time he saw them, but that turned out to kind of be justified paranoia that he was able to undo. So it was mostly okay, kind of.
mm.
Um, yeah, there's no reason to hate John, but this he still has to be on the list, and it sucks.
It really does suck. Yeah. So next up, goblins. An interesting candidate for how to bind, right? They maybe feel like they might be the most difficult just because there's so fucking many of them. But individually, obviously, they don't feel super strong.
Yeah, the vibe you sort of get from the goblins is that it would be easy to do one or two of them, but you don't really get that chance because they're just usually in groups and there's a fuck ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, they're all like unique. Like something that comes up, it's like Toad Swallow kind of acts like this, and Blunt Munch acts like this, and it's like it's hard to juggle all of those things at once.
Yeah, there's too much going on for you to really know how to fully take them out in one fell swoop, which makes the assumption that they're all united, which maybe is not necessarily true, but yeah,
Yeah, you're right. In 5.d, we saw that Toad
the Toad
Swallow.
Swallow's up to some shenanigans. I mean, maybe that means they are united because Toad Swallow's kind of in command of all of them, but we don't really know.
Yeah, yeah. No, it feels like by not including Blunt Munch, she was implying that there's at least one line they could be divided down.
Yeah, yeah,
But then on
true.
the other hand, with goblins, you have to sort of take into account that if there's a fight, the other half might just join in because it's a fight.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, maybe just for the sake of, hey, let's do it, let's scrap. I mean,
Hmm.
if it's Toad Swallow on one side, I can see it being some other goblins joining the other side just because they might want to usurp Toad Swallow's relative position of power.
Yeah,
It's another potential angle.
true.
So yeah, the other thing that's discussed is that goblins will turn into weapons when they're bound or cornered, which is interesting. Do you know what weapons any of the goblins might turn into? I'm trying to think like what's a toad swallow esque weapon, something that's kind of rough around the edges, but sorry, like the opposite,
Yeah.
clean around the edges, but a real shit underneath.
My best guess for Toad Swallow, like originally I had a sneaky dagger, which was the best I could do, but it didn't feel right. I reckon a musket kind of suits Toad Swallow because
Mm.
it's like this sort of like for the time intricate sort of machine. It kind of feels old timey, like Toad Swallow walks around acting all posh with a monocle and stuff, even though he's not like I don't know. Yeah, I'm looking in musket for Toad Swallow.
Oh yeah, I could see that, especially because it's kind of got this like especially like old wars, especially among certain
Yeah,
segments of population, have this like glorified angle to them. But something like a musket, which has a bullet that's not super highly refined and a blade that's not super highly refined, is just going to be a real nightmare overall, right? I like that
yeah.
angle.
Well, and like they're a bit versatile. Like you said, they got the bullet and the sword. Like for the time, they were quite gadgety, and that's
Yeah,
that other part of
true.
Toad Swallow.
Yeah, I like it.
My only other confident answer is that Cherry Pop would probably be a thumbtack.
Okay, sure, why not? That's just equivalent to her level of power, I guess.
Yeah, it's just a small, sharp thing that kind of irritates you if you poke yourself with it.
Yeah. Okay, next up is The Lost, which starts out with Miss. Although it seems unlikely Miss will need to be bound based on her current position in the story, but better to be prepared, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, this is the one you said. John was the entry that hurt you the
mm,
most. This was the one that hurt me the most. Is when I saw
mm,
Lost as a category, and it's like Miss and Snowdrop, and I was like, how fucking dare you put these two on the list
yeah.
of potential bindees?
Yeah. I mean, binding Miss it just feels explicitly like it's a death sentence, right? Like you're affixing a label to her, and that is something that we saw from her portion of that interlude, is just so fundamentally against what she is.
Yeah, what really sucks about this Miss one is that they don't really know how to bind her like in a circle. Like a lot of these
Yeah.
other ones, it's invasive and controlling, but it's just kind of like a temporary imprisonment, like overnight jail. Like, oh, we'll stick John in a circle for 24 hours, but then he can get out, and it's
Yeah.
just a relationship that's broken. With Miss, there's not a circle you put her in for a day. It's like, oh, we have to help attach a label to her, which kind of fundamentally undermines who
Yes.
she is permanently.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucked up.
Yep. Rough. Um, yeah. And then, of course, they discuss binding Snowdrop, which again feels like a huge transgression, although they actually don't really get into it in any level of detail, which was nice. They basically say, oh,
Yeah.
we better put Snowdrop in this list, and here's one thing that she likes and dislikes, but they don't actually talk about how they would bind her to the same extent, which is nice.
Yeah, it almost just feels like they're like, "Oh, we're listing all the Kennet others, and I guess Snowdrop is on that list, so we
Yeah.
better put her down for fairness."
Yes.
Um, we also get a little tease here about the Oni again, and I'm just
Yep.
gonna keep bringing this up every time these do that because they're driving me nuts. I need this fucking Oni
Yeah,
story.
I don't know why my eyes, I guess, just glazed over it. But when I was checking out your live read on, the Pale Reflections Twitter, you pointed out, and I was like, oh yeah, another instance of the Oni being referenced in such a little throwaway way that just makes them more engaging to think about. I think there's something to it. I think there's something to this conspiracy theory that you're brewing that the Oni are going to somehow be very important to the story or show up in the story in some way.
Yeah, well, didn't we get it confirmed that at one point they're like waging war on the concept of the practice? Like that
Yes.
feels important. Like yeah, like I
Feels
feel
relevant to what our characters are doing for sure.
Like Wobbo is just is seeding this stuff very intentionally, but it's been going on long enough now that I'm actually getting mad because I need it so like
Is it
mad
just
in the sense
Wildbow
of
fucking with you
insanity.
now? Is it just at the point where Wildbow is just fucking with you?
The original plan was to tell like the only story mid arc 6, but he saw everyone's reactions and he was like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm going to keep teasing them for a
Keep it
bit."
going a bit longer. Yeah, so who's the practice? Is it Yadira who's Oni related? Is that right? I can't
Yes.
remember now.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's highly likely that when Alexander makes his master stroke, the conflict with Yadira will potentially come to a head. So I expect that's when we'll start to see the Oni stuff. We'll have to see.
I just don't care how it happens. I just need it
You
to.
just need it to happen.
It's driving me insane.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get to information on some of the new others in town, obviously starting with Tashlit, who we've already met briefly, who again doesn't get that much information on how you might bind her, but it seems like her power is explicitly weakened by having innocence around. So that'd be a potential way to take her down. Just have innocence around and she can't really do much anyway.
She's also like a second generation god
Yes.
begotten,
Yes.
which like they also say
Is
those
weaker
ones
by
are
a
just
lot.
pretty
Yeah.
shit
Yeah.
and also sterile. Like basically this whole segment just seems to exist to make us feel even more sorry for Tashlit
Yep.
than we already did. Like she just I mean, everyone keeps saying, "Oh, she's just sort of taking it in her stride." And just the more we learn about her, the more impressed I am by that because she's gotten a real shit lot
Yeah,
in
she got a
life.
bad hand, didn't she? Poor Tash.
Like she's got this heritage that is basically just hurting her, and she's managed to move somewhere, and it's just been like, yeah, I'm just going to do the best I can, and that's like
Yep.
really impressive.
Yep. And then we meet the new favorite character. Move over Snowdrop. Move over Cherry Pop. We have Sig. I put the word sentient here in my description of Sig as a sentient cigarette. I don't even know if that's fair. Like it, based on the description, Sig seems to have no personality. Basically, just kind of is around sometimes doing miscellaneous stuff. Yeah, it's a weird one.
Yeah, I feel like we talked about this at the start of the story with the Hungry Choir, like trying to separate this idea that sentience is like a one line thing, like you're either
Yeah.
like from a rock to a human, but
Yeah.
it's more like there's many dimensions to what makes like sentience, and like Sig is sitting very far along some of them. Like it can guard the perimeter,
Yeah.
which is like insane, but then also like it's not really personified in a way that it has personality or anything
Well,
as
yeah, and it
well.
can't
So
like talk. Seemingly, the way it
yeah.
marks if there's been a breach is it just kind of burns a hole into the map at that point, which is such a great method of communication.
Yeah, but it's like so there's obviously intelligence there because it can
Yes,
observe and communicate,
yes,
but like yeah, does it have a sense of humor,
yeah, exactly.
Uh
What is it like to interact with? So yeah, I really want to get more info on Sig. It's just so enticing to find out more about.
it's just yeah, it's such a wild concept. Like I think everyone's had the same reaction of just like what the
This is
fuck? That's
awesome. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, and then on the other side, it's fire related. It's a cigarette, so like Avery opens this section with, some of these could be allies to our culprits, and then it's
Yeah.
like, oh, Edith is basically our most confirmed culprit, and here we have a new fire related other. Like,
Yep. Edith's gonna
should I?
light Sig, and something crazy is gonna happen.
I mean, like, maybe I don't know.
Who knows? We'll have to find out, I guess. But yes, then we get a final bit of this chapter where they retouch on the idea of Matthew and discuss how they might not actually need to necessarily bind Matthew if they can, or even Edith potentially, if they can bind the Doom and kind of control them that way.
Yeah, which like I mean, it's true. Like as sort of already touched on, like the Doom has Matthew kind of as bound as he has it in a way, and if you
Yes.
can exploit that,
Yes.
you can put both of their lives on the line in a way that is super gross but fair.
Yeah, effectively binding them. It's gross. It's the worst, but it's correct. It's an avenue. So yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah,
I love that as the way to finish off this section, like, just in case, because maybe you're like me and you got caught up in the fun problem-solving part of, like, "Oh, how would we bind a fairy?" Like, "Oh, Guillerme can get bound by heartbreak. How might we do that?" Like, do we bring up, like, his old dead lover?
Mm,
Um, and, like, it could be easy to get lost in, like, the fun problem-solving part of that, so we really just end this extra material with, "Hey, just a reminder, this shit fucking sucks."
mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the end of the extra material. But not the end of our episode, because we want to dive back into some some predictions left by the community on just what's going to happen in this story.
Yeah, we skipped this a few weeks ago and then somehow ended up skipping it for like 3 weeks in a row. So that's
Yeah,
our
so now we've got
bad.
a
So
whole backlog of big predictions to go through, which is great.
yeah. So
Um,
what have you got for us, Ruben?
I put out one. I mean, it's not a prediction because it's definitely correct. Which I know I've said before, but this time, unironically, not in a memey way. This is just so perfect that it just is correct, and it's effectively a monster corner, which is talking about. This is by Horseshoe Crab, by the way. Talking about Mr. Rudbeck, who was a summon, one of the 3 summons in Duraché's class, where Lucy pulled out her weapon and threatened Durachet in that great moment. Um, I'm just going to read out the first part of it. So, Mr. Rudbeck represents black-eyed Susans, which, if you're not familiar, is a type of flower. He's surrounded by yellow flowers, has a dark eye in the form of a snake, and invades his surroundings as black-eyed Susans do. And as the clincher, these flowers belong to the genus Rudbeckia. It's all been spelled out for us. This is just
Oh,
perfect. It's just so great. It's Mr. Rudbeck was the guy with the snake head, by the way.
yeah. Yeah.
Just such a perfect thing of like, oh, this is what Wabo was referencing with this other. That's awesome. The kind of this spirit of an invasive species, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that was the one that I felt like we had the least understanding of in that segment.
Yeah.
So like
Horseshoe
this
Crab
does
has
feel like it's
effectively joined all the dots for us. So thank you,
yeah,
Horseshoe
yeah.
Crab.
Feels like it's filling in some gaps. And Wildbow's shown off his like garden knowledge. I think it was like
Yes.
mid arc 3. We had that whole gardening metaphor for the town.
Yep.
So
Yep.
um
Very
yeah.
consistent.
I
Love it.
I'd be willing to believe this was an intentional reference.
I mean, the fact that it's from the genus Rudbeckia is just
Yeah.
so on the nose that it just must be true, right?
Yeah, that was what clinched it for me. Yeah.
What have you pulled out, Elliot?
So I pulled out a prediction from Drake Marshall,
Mm-hmm.
who basically presents the theory that Verona will become a collector, like when she eventually specializes.
Mm.
Um, which I mean, I think I'd be interested in having the argument about whether she ever will specialize, or like,
Mm.
could she remain a dabbler? Is that something you're allowed to do? Um, but anyway, like if we move that argument aside and assume she is going to specialize, I
Mm.
think Drake makes a good case for why a collector is a good fit for her. Um, like she's expressed interest in all these researches that usually revolve around magical items, so stuff like alchemy and enchantment, and like taking normal objects and making them magical. Um, and I think like the really other interesting thing they bring up is that she has this like budding rivalry with Bristow Brewing,
Mm.
um, in a similar way to Alexander. But like Drake Marshall sort of points out like a good rivalry usually comes from the fact that people have a lot of similarities. Um, so maybe setting up Verona as a
As a more
collector who's
active
got
foil to Bristow, yeah.
yeah, and but what like a collector with principles as opposed to Bristow.
Yeah.
Like so she wouldn't collect people in the same way.
Well, potentially the thing I like about this is it might give us an avenue to really break the hold that um, that Bristow has on people like Clem by Verona potentially kind of taking over the claim to them and then either releasing it or just using it more ethically, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would be definitely very tough to use the term collector, like with someone in terms of people like Clem, and still have me think that she's doing it in a good way. But
Yeah.
um, like you're right, it does feel possible. Like if she was definitely someone who put all of her effort into improving those people's lives rather than her own, like actually doing proper charity as opposed to Bristow's like technically they're 1 point better than they were before. So the fact that I get 10 points,
Yeah.
it's still good of
I
me.
mean, that's what Bristow has said, right? Is, oh, I'm
Yeah,
going to treat them badly, but they're still very slightly better off. And that's his
yeah, yeah, exactly.
justification.
Yeah, I'm a good person because I improve their lives by 1%, even though I could do it by 50.
Mm,
Um, but it'd still feel icky to call Verona a collector in that context.
mm, yeah. Yeah, there's no way for that not to be icky, right?
Mm.
Um, yeah, well, great work, Horseshoe Crab and Drake Marshall. If you, dear audience, want to leave your pale predictions, there is a link down in our show notes down below where you can leave them. But before we go, we brought back predictions from a few weeks ago and bring back something else that we haven't done in a few weeks while we've been busy. It's a discussion question.
Yeah, I'm just now realizing, I haven't actually run this one past you,
Oh,
so
that's
I
fine.
I
Freestyle
hope
it,
you think
baby.
it's cool. Yeah, I mean, like, this is more of a discussion prompt, but it's pick a monster or creature from any piece of fiction and explain how you might bind it in Pale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, we just had that whole big extra material on, like, brainstorming binding stuff.
Yep.
So go nuts and do your own creative writing piece on, I don't know, binding a White Walker in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't know. Do something cooler
Interesting. I
than
like
that.
it.
But
How would you bind what's the species that Yoda's from again?
I don't know that that species has a name.
How would you bind Yodos? Uh, that's it. Oh, yeah, like a Star Wars alien or anything, any old fictional monster. Go for it.
You'd write a binding circle that's like written in good proper grammar
Oh
as a
yeah,
negative binding.
that's the antithesis. Actually, speaking of Yoda, this wasn't an intentional segue, but it's a great way for us to segue into something that we're doing. I think tomorrow or today, in less than 24 hours when this episode comes out.
Yeah.
Um, we are continuing doing another live watch for the next episode of our bonus content show, The High Ground.
Yeah, so this one's going to be a bit more public. I think usually the live watches are just for the people in the tier to that can listen to the episodes, but um, we thought the Star Wars Holiday Special was important and precious enough that everyone should be able to experience it.
Are we just
Um,
watching? So our next episode is going to be covering two holiday specials. Are we just watching the Star Wars holiday, the old one first?
the old one is all we have penciled in, but like depending on how everyone's feeling at the end, we might
Yeah,
just do the other one then.
yeah, cool. We'll see how we
Um,
go.
yeah, it depends. Like I think after 90 minutes of the original, everyone might just want to leave.
Yeah,
So
or
I don't want to commit.
refresh your brain with something more,
Like, yeah,
akin with modern sensibilities, I guess.
yeah, go for a run.
Yes.
Eh,
Yeah.
yeah. So in terms of whether we'll do the new Lego one as well tomorrow, we'll play that by ear. But yeah, that'll all sort of be happening through our Discord. So if you're interested, come through the Doof Discord and we'll help you get set up.
Yep. We'll give you all the information you need. Just check in on the Discord on the what channel is the right channel for that?
Just pop into Doof General, I
Yep,
suppose,
we'll figure it out.
and we'll send you the links. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Cool. So yeah, so check that out. While you're on the Discord, why not just hang around and be a part of the community? If you're not a part of the Discord, what I should have said is, if you're not a part of the Discord, there's a great way to become a part of the Discord, which is supporting Doof Media on Patreon. For $1 a month currently, you can get in and join the best part of the community in my mind, which is joining in with all the community events like the live watches and the streams we do for Game Club and all these other bits and pieces that are more or less entirely managed through the community on Discord.
Yeah, as we're recording this, it was about 24 hours ago that we had a s- we got a game club fight club together in Dark
Yes.
Souls, and
Yep.
we had a bunch of the game club people come on, and we all sort of had tournaments. It was
To see
very
who
fun.
was the best warrior in Dark Souls. So if you want to know
Yeah,
who won that, you got to get on the Discord or participate in stuff like that in the
yeah.
future or whatever. Yeah.
It could have been Ruben and I who won it. You won't know
You'll
unless
never
you
know.
know. It
It
wasn't.
wasn't though. Yes. So yeah. Head to the Patreon, patreon.com/media to get in on that.
Yes. While you're on Patreon, don't forget to swing by patreon.com/Wildbow. As of recording this, you're listening to like an episode that's over an hour and a half, just on the topic of his stories. So
Yeah. So you've
swing
crossed
some
the
money if you
barrier
can.
where you should ethically support Wildbow, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
um, yeah, cool. All right. Well, I guess that's that. Check us out on the Discord, and we'll catch you next week for that Alexander interlude that's definitely coming.
Yep, yep. an episode all on the brownie interlude that's happening.
Yep.
Can't wait.
See you then.